morning. Welcome, friends. I am Dr. Malia Jones from Dear Pandemic, and I am here today with Dr. Lauren Hale, who comes to us from Long Island, New York, where she is a professor in the public health department at Stony Brook University. She's also one of the original nerdy girls here at Dear Pandemic. She's been helping us cover the pandemic for more than a year. So thanks for joining us today, Lauren.
I am psyched to be here.
So Lauren is a sleep scientist, and she is interested in sleep as a public health and social justice priority. She's also the vice chair of the board of directors at the National Sleep Foundation, and she studies screen time and lots of behavioral health issues.
School start time.
What was that?
I'm squeezing that in there. School start time, high school
start time.
School too early.
Yeah, and so I have a question. It's, we've all struggled this week with the time change, daylight savings time, and I was surprised to learn from you earlier this week that not only is it super annoying and disruptive to my life, but we actually see higher rates of heart attacks and car accidents the week after spring daylight savings time. Why is that?
That's right. So the facts are approximately about a 10 to 20% increase in heart attack and stroke risk the week after, really just the first few days after the spring shift from standard time to daylight saving time, and a 6% increase in accidents, meaning traffic accidents, workplace accidents, every single year. We see this with the annual shift as we jump forward an hour with daylight saving. So here's why. This is the message I want you to take with you every day and every night. Sufficient restorative sleep is essential for the optimal functioning of every single organ in your body. That means your heart, your brain, your stomach. It all counts on you getting the sleep you need. So in spring, when we jump forward, our bodies go to bed at what feels like the normal time, but morning comes an hour earlier. So everybody's walking around with a certain amount of sleep debt to begin with, not everybody, but too many people. And then when you have this abrupt change, you have added injury and, up to an hour less sleep if they weren't adequately preparing for the looming change in clock times. And that added change of up to an hour loss of sleep causes physiological dysregulation and cognitive impairment. And that's why we see health and safety risks every spring when we change the clocks. So now there's an effort to try and eliminate the clock changes, ideally scientifically, to permanent standard time, which means getting the light early in the morning and having it get darker a little later, a little earlier in the evening. So morning light is preferred from a sleep perspective.
Well, I know, as a parent, I have always called daylight savings time the bane of every parent of young children's existence. It's just kind of hellish every year. What can we do to advocate for the end of this? This special.
Gosh. Well, this is a little bit of a complicated topic because the public opinion differs from the scientific opinion. And a lot of the public either has no opinion on the topic or prefers longer nights. And so there are some people arguing for the permanent, including Rubio, permanent daylight savings time. But in terms of optimal outcomes for sleep, the National Sleep Foundation, and which I'm a part of, and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is arguing for permanent standard time. So, this would be a major federal policy change if implemented, and it would be an uphill battle, but it would have better health outcomes if we landed on permanent standard time. But at least both sides of this argument agree that the shifting of the clocks twice a year is disruptive and kind of a pain in the tush. So there's agreement that the shifting is unnecessary. But we need to decide which one we go with.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that. Well, we are going to talk about COVID today, as well as some sleep science and other behavioral health issues. I want to get started with a couple of notes. First, of course, I have a big thank you to give to Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing in Nashville, Tennessee, for providing ASL interpretation, we are having a little technical difficulty with the CART live closed captioning services, but that might come online somewhere partway through the live today. We are still working on it. So this service is available. Basically, Bridges is doing this for us for free, and it's really helpful to us if you let us know in the comments that you're using it. So if you are using these services, please do let us know. And the other thing that I want to mention is that our good friend and colleague, Dr. Emily Smith, who is the epidemiologist behind Friendly Neighbor Epidemiologist, has been nominated for a big national award called the Data Heroes Award. It's super cool, and it is actually a public vote. And so if you would go to her, to the dataheroaward.org website and consider voting for Dr. Emily Smith, that would be awesome. We really would like her to be recognized with that award. So we'll put a link to the award voting website in the comments. Voting closes at the end of this month, which is in 10 days. So just as a reminder, we're going to dive into reader questions. We don't take questions cold out of the comment box here, because we like to look up the answers to the questions. And so you should go over to our website and submit your question in the question box. It's right at the top of our website, which is dearpandemic.org. And while you're there, you could search for your question. We have answered 1,000 questions. We're somewhere right around 1,000 over the last year. So the answer to your question might actually just be lurking on our website. So I've got the first question for you, Lauren, if you're ready.
Totally.
Sue from Arlington, Virginia wrote in and asked us, she says, in-person school just started back in my area. Should I have my kids remove their clothes and shower right when they get home to prevent them from getting bringing any kind of disease home with them?
Okay, so first of all, I'm originally from Northern Virginia, so I've been following the return to school down there. Shout out to all you parents. I'm very happy that your kids are getting some in-person schooling this year. And the short answer to that is probably not necessary. This question gets at something called fomite transmission. And fomite transmission refers to catching a virus through a contaminated surface. Now, sometimes people use the word fomite. I've noticed this on social media incorrectly, but just to be clear, the fomite refers to the object that is contaminated. So it's the doorknob, the serving spoon, or in this case, the clothes. And here's like the really great news about a year's worth of research on COVID-19. Fomite transmission is not a common mechanism through transmission for COVID-19. So doesn't seem to be a reason to change clothes as soon as you get home. What's important is what happens when you're in the room with other potentially contaminated people. So you want to make sure your kids' schools are adhering to all the protocols: better ventilation, masking, social distancing, hand washing. Hand washing would also be a way to reduce fomite transmission if that were a concern, but hand washing is good practice anyway. I'll just say, if you know that you are exposed to somebody or you work in a high risk environment, such as a hospital, an emergency room, coming home and taking off your clothes and getting into something more comfortable isn't going to hurt. It might make you feel better, and there's benefit in that too. So it's okay to do, but not necessary as far as we know.
Yeah. Excellent. And we'll put a couple of links about that. There's a great Goats and Soda FAQ about exactly this question.
Right.
All right. Do you have a question for me?
I sure do. From Paul in Janesville, Minnesota. I'm aware of a Janesville in Wisconsin, I thought, but maybe there's also.
I had to look it up. I thought he might be Janesville, Wisconsin too, but no, it is in fact Minnesota.
Great. So here's his question. I'm still not understanding these efficacy statistics. If 1,000 fully vaccinated people were put in a room together for a week and the air was continually contaminated, how many would get symptoms?
Yeah, so this efficacy thing is so challenging to understand. And I think people, like Paul, just really want to know, like, how much is my risk reduced? What does this 95% or 90% or whatever it is mean to me? And so what I really like about this thought experiment that Paul has set up for us is that we're taking a few of the unknowns out of the equation. Specifically, the unknowns about whether we're exposed at all. These 1,000 per 10 people have all been exposed in a room for a week. And also, when we're exposed, what are the chances that we're going to have symptoms, right? Those two things have been kind of taken care of by the fact that we know these people have been exposed. So let's just go through, we'll use the Pfizer trial results. The Moderna trial results are very similar. Just as an example, they show about 95% efficacy in the phase 3, the large clinical trials. So efficacy is a comparison. And so what we need to know is what we know is that the vaccinated people in this room will have 95% fewer cases than another group of people who are unvaccinated that we did the same thing to, right? So we put 1,000 vaccinated people in a room and exposed them. And then we put 1,000 unvaccinated people and exposed them. And what we know is that according to the trials, 95% fewer of the vaccinated people will get symptoms than the unvaccinated group. So how many people is that? You know, Paul just wants to know the answer to the question, I'm sure. So we can look back to understand how many people in the unvaccinated group would have had symptoms anyway, right? We need to know a few things. One is how many people are exposed to COVID-19 and somehow never get infected. And also how many people are exposed to COVID-19 and then have an asymptomatic case of disease. So we can look back to the experiment that happened accidentally on the cruise ship Diamond Princess very early in the pandemic for some clues here. And what we learned from the Diamond Princess situation, this was so early in the pandemic that mitigation measures really were not taken. So we can assume that all 3,700 people on board were exposed to some extent. And what we learned is that about 20% of those people became ill, and something like 25% of them were asymptomatic. Now, Diamond Princess was, as I said, very early in the pandemic. There have been some attempts to update this. It's called the attack rate and the asymptomatic rate. But it's challenging because it wouldn't be ethical for us to just like shoot COVID-19 virus right up people's nose and see how many of them get sick, right? So everything that happened after Diamond Princess happened in a context where people were taking some precautions. And so we don't have a more recent, like really good experiment where we can, where we know everyone was exposed and really no mitigation measures were taken. That said, the observational studies that have been done mostly support that the attack rate is around 20% and the asymptomatic rate is somewhere between 20 and 50%. It's a little hard to pin down. Okay, so the attack rate's 20%, the asymptomatic rate is 25%. So you take these 1,000 unvaccinated people, you put them in a room and purposely expose them for a week. We think around 150 of them would become symptomatic. Now you do the same thing to a group of vaccinated people, put them in a room and expose them for a week. According to the efficacy statistics, 8 of them would be symptomatic. And so you're looking at 8 versus 150 in the vaccinated versus unvaccinated group. Now, of course, that's not how the trials worked, right? We didn't purposely expose the control group. We just had people walking around in their normal daily lives. So, you know, the estimate is 95%. There is a confidence interval on that. We don't know exactly what people's exposure was. There are a lot of other sort of caveats to that, but I think that's the clearest way that I can answer this question based on the thought experiment of purposely exposing people. The other important thing to note is you would want to make sure that the vaccinated group and the unvaccinated group were not different in some way, right? One of the things on the Diamond Princess and some other cruise ships was the age structure. And so we saw very different results on the Diamond Princess and other cruise ships compared to some military ships where a lot of people were exposed because the age on those military ships was much lower. So the attack rate was lower because because younger people are less often get sick when they're exposed to COVID-19. So there was a terrific explainer of how to interpret the efficacy statistics in the New York Times recently, and we're going to put a link to that in the comments too. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit. I've got another question for you, Lauren.
Sure.
We have Kristen from Iowa who would like to know. She says, I'm curious about eating food prepared by others. I've only eaten food I prepared at home this past year, which is amazing.
Totally.
And I am so leery to start back to eating food prepared from restaurants and so on. Can you please provide some information on the chance of COVID spreading through prepared food?
Yeah. Kristen, you are my hero. I love cooking, but I don't know how you've done it this whole year. And yes, you can get takeout. Please go get some takeout. Really similar to the Fomite transmission question, there's not evidence of transmission of the virus that causes COVID-19 from food. That said, there are ways that you can behave so that you can get takeout more safely. And these are just basic tips. Hopefully, many of you have already been employing these tips, but it's good to run through them again in case you slip up. We're like gradually opening up and we forget, but here are some basic things. You always want to limit your in-person interaction with people that you don't know their exposure. So if you can order delivery or you order for pickup for takeout, choose a time that it's not going to be crowded, or choose a place that's not going to be crowded. Wear a mask if you're going in to pay or to pick up. Better yet, wear a double mask. We're still not in the clear yet, folks. If you can pay over the phone, that will limit the amount of time you have to spend face-to-face with another person. And perhaps the most important message is, if you know you've been exposed or you're not feeling well for any reason, not the day to order takeout. Stay home and you'll be protecting other people and reducing the spread. So
yeah,
that's my message.
So the key point being that, again, it's not the food itself. It's actually your face-to-face interactions with all the other people while you're getting your takeout.
Great. Okay, another question from Virginia. I guess here we go. Linda from Virginia referred to an article by Emily Oster in The Atlantic, says that once adults are vaccinated, we should and can return to normal for our kids. She compared children's rates of severe illness to the outcomes of vaccination, saying that their natural protection should have us considering our young kids the same as a vaccinated grandmother. Would you agree? I'd love for my kids to be able to play with their friends as normal, no masks, etc. But I can't reconcile that with my perception of the inherent risks of COVID. Great question.
Yes, great question. And this article by Dr. Oster has caused quite the brouhaha on amongst the scientific community, especially on Twitter this week. So I will say, in my opinion, and a lot of smart people that I respect agree, this is a bad take. The whole thing has turned really ugly among scientists on Twitter, and that's frankly very unhelpful, because now I can't just say this is a bad take without sounding like I'm also getting personal about it and being a jerk. It's not personal, it's just a bad take. So what I want to talk about here, I want to talk about what risk is. Risk is defined as just the possibility that something bad could happen. And when we talk about risks of COVID, we're talking about the risks of something bad happening. There are several different something bads that might happen with COVID, right? One is the risk that we'll be exposed to COVID at all. One is the risk that if we're exposed, that we get it. That's, I just talked earlier about the attack rate. Not everybody who's exposed actually ends up getting it at all. There's also the risk that if we get it, we'll pass it along to other people, and how many people we might pass it on to. And then finally, there's the risk that if we get COVID, we'll be hospitalized or die of COVID. When Oster says that children are not at high risk for COVID-19. She means specifically they are not at high risk for severe disease, or that is to say hospitalization or death when they get the disease themselves. And so she's making a comparison here between the risk of hospitalization or death between unvaccinated children and vaccinated older adults. I think it was quite bad phrasing, and maybe even misleading to say that you can think of them as already vaccinated, because they are not already vaccinated. Vaccination protects the individual person from death and other severe disease, but it does much more. The goal of a vaccination program is to reduce the circulation of the disease in the population broadly, right? And just being a susceptible kid who is not at high risk of death or hospitalization doesn't achieve that. It's not the same as being vaccinated. So, vaccination contributes to herd immunity. It protects everyone around you from disease transmission. And that's the reason, one of the reasons that the CDC's recommendations for fully vaccinated people say that they can visit with other people with no masks on. Now, Oster goes on, she says, the central goal of vaccination is preventing serious illness and death. From this standpoint, being a child is a really great vaccine. And she also says, you can think of your son or daughter as an already vaccinated grandparent. No, that is incorrect. Being a child is not the same as being vaccinated. The comparison between being vaccinated and being a susceptible child is very limited. And this, I think, really does go too far.
Right.
What do you think, Lauren?
And there's a public health consequence of sending the inaccurate message that children are basically vaccinated, because it means once there is an approved vaccine for children, parents may think, what's the need? My kids are basically
vaccinated. Yeah.
And that's not true. And you need to, our goal of achieving herd immunity requires children to be part of the picture.
Yeah.
So it is, as you said, a bad take.
Yeah. Yeah, when she reaches for herd immunity as the path to kids being vaccinated or kids being protected from exposure by this summer, I think that's truly very optimistic. And because without getting kids vaccinated, then we probably can't reach herd immunity. Kids make up enough of the total population that we need kids to be in that immune group in order to get to herd immunity. And, we're seeing still, depending on the population group, we're seeing between 10 and 25% of adults who are not planning to get vaccinated right now. So, without kids being vaccinated, we definitely won't get to herd immunity, and we won't get there by this summer one way or the other. So, and then one final note I just have to add, even Dr. Oster is not saying that kids can follow the CDC guidelines for unvaccinated people, which is to say forego masks when they're interacting together. That is not even what she said. So I think the interpretation of what she said is going too far too. Great. So there's been a ton of Twitter discussion about this on amongst scientists. And one that I found quite helpful was, we're going to drop the link to in the comments, and it has kind of a breakdown of the problems with the argument. And it also has some really good, practical recommendations for how you can have that summer vacation and interact along with your kids along with you, that I really do agree with, and that I think is much more sound advice. And that's advice from Tara Smith. And if you scroll down in her Twitter thread on this, you'll see the advice there. So I think we do have time for one last question, Lauren.
You got it. Okay, this is a question from Renee from Jefferson City, Missouri. The first two vaccines both came with the warning to not get the vaccine if you've had a reaction to the flu shot, which I have had. I can't find any information on the J&J vaccine about this. I'd like to get vaccinated, but no one can tell me if the J&J one is safe for me. How can I find out?
Yeah, so Renee, I don't know what kind of reaction you had to the flu shot, but I will say that if you're only excluded from the recommendation to get the 3 vaccines we have available in the United States and the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is available in the UK. if you have had an allergic reaction to the ingredients in them. And that is just really just a severe and anaphylactic allergic reaction to the specific ingredients in the vaccine. We can post, I've done a roundup of what those ingredients are. The one that seems to cause the most trouble for people is called PEG. And so if you're not allergic to those specific ingredients, actually these vaccines are recommended for you. If you had typical vaccine side effects to the flu vaccine, like every year I get a sore arm, a headache, tiredness, achy muscles, I have to go to bed for 12 hours and then I wake up feeling okay the next day. Those are typical vaccine side effects, the vaccine reactions, and that does not exclude you from getting any of these vaccines. So all three of them would be okay for you if you've had a reaction to another vaccine like that. And actually, even if you've had an anaphylactic reaction, a really severe allergic reaction to another vaccine, you can still get them. You will just be asked to wait a little bit longer after your vaccination. They'll observe you for 30 minutes rather than 15 minutes after your vaccination. So in all probability, you actually are recommended for any of these three vaccines. If you want to read who is recommended for the vaccines, we'll drop the CDC link. It actually has the three that are approved in the United States listed separately, and you can read who is recommended for them at this time.
And I'll just add that if you still are uncertain, we are not clinicians, so check with your specific medical provider to confirm that you'll be safe. So.
That's right. I'm not your doctor. I'm not anybody's doctor, but I can tell you who they're recommended for. And they're actually recommended for almost everyone who's old enough to get them. They're not recommended for kids yet. Okay, well, that is all we have time for today. Time flies when you're having fun. We do get a ton of questions every week. We don't get to all of them on the show, but we read them all. So if you have a question, please do go over to our website and put it in the question box. We use those to decide what we're going to post about for the next week. We use them to decide what the topics are for our next week's live, and they're really very interesting to read. So please do put them there. It's on our website at dearpandemic.org. So another thank you to Bridges for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing for providing ASL interpretation. And I see the card services did eventually get going, so that we can be more inclusive and get this information out to more people. If you're using those services, I would love to know in the comments. And that's all I have for today. So thanks for joining us. I'll be here at the same time next week, Saturday at 9:30 Central Time. And I don't know who my guest is next week, so it'll be a surprise to you and to me. So thanks for being here, Lauren. Until next week, everybody stay safe and stay sane.
Yeah.